Hello? So it walks like a duck, and it quacks like a duck, but it shoots fire like a dragon? Sounds like a spicy duck. Hello, fellow wargamers and history buffs. Today we are going to continue our examination of 1811 Albuera from the Tactical Workshop. And particularly, we're going to take a look at some of the game mechanics that set it apart from some of the other Napoleonic games that I have played, and probably many of you have too. So let's dive in. The Fix Bayonet system has all the elements you would expect with a battalion-level Napoleonic game. Infantry, cavalry, artillery, leaders, various formations, movement, fire combat, melee combat, morale checks, and army morale levels. If you've played a La Bataille or Vive l'Empereur series game, you will find much that is familiar. The three game mechanics that I wanted to examine are those for command and control, skirmishers, and unit fatigue. As I briefly touched upon in the first video about this game, all of the leaders of the various formations have a leader card, and their activation is then going to be determined by the order in which the players choose those leader cards. During each phase, the players are going to select the leaders they wish, and the one with the higher leader value will be activated first. The one with the lower leader value will wait. In order for a leader to move, he needs to have received an order from his superior officer or the army leader. An operations marker is placed on the map indicating the destination for the leader and the operation zone. If the operations marker is placed within the proximity to enemy units, it is displayed with the question mark symbol because this is a contested zone. The leader now must make a roll to pass their strategic rating. A successful roll will cause the operation marker to flip to its front side, and the leader and his formation can now proceed into that contested area. A failed roll will leave that area and order pending, and the leader will be flipped to his passive side. Towards the end of the turn, in the cleanup phase, passive leaders will make a strategic rating roll to become active. If they succeed, they are flipped back to their active side, and during subsequent turns, they can roll again to see if they can activate and move towards their new operational goal. So the upshot of this rule set for the command control is you'll have an opportunity to activate all the leaders that are in your army. Now, whether they're able to execute their orders, whether they're able to move, that's going to be determined by their overall leader quality and also where you send them. Better leaders are going to do what you want them to do. Less quality leaders are going to either refuse to do it or take a longer time to execute on those orders. And so that lends a certain amount of friction to how your army is going to move, and maybe in a better way simulate that same sort of friction that would be happening in a Napoleonic battlefield. So unlike other games where You might have fewer opportunities to activate formations, but then when you do, they do exactly what you want them to. Or maybe they're randomly drawn, and you don't have a choice of when that formation gets to activate. In this particular case, you have the choice of when it goes, but you don't necessarily have full control over if it goes and does what it wants to do. So a very interesting concept, one that I find very intriguing, and I'm having some fun with in the play of the game. So every infantry battalion has a skirmish value. The skirmish value in this particular game is an intrinsic value. It's not represented by a counter. Instead, it's projected out into the forward hexes of the unit, and then units moving into that are going to be affected by that skirmish value and have to make a morale check as a result. In this particular case, we can see that the Légère unit on the left-hand side has a 3-factor skirmish value. That's higher than the line unit on the right, which has a slightly smaller skirmish value of 2. We see a higher skirmish value represented in the units that were at Albuera that were trained in skirmishing, like the King's German Legion units and some of the other rifle-armed units in the British Army. We also see that the regular British line troops have a very good skirmish value, and that's indicative of the national training that they had that was part of their doctrine. Battalions in the Spanish Army generally have lower skirmish values, and this reflects the lack of training that they had in this particular element of infantry combat. Certain light cavalry units with a green printed movement factor have the ability to adopt skirmish formation. They would be placed to straddle 2 hexes or marked with a skirmish formation counter. We can look at how this skirmish factor works in a real situation. In this case, the Toledo Infantry Regiment wishes to move forward and engage the Légère unit, the 3rd of the 16th. As it moves into the skirmish zone in front of the 3rd of the 16th, the French player can ask the Spanish player to make a morale check. The French have a skirmish value of 3, and the Toledo Regiment has a skirmish value of 0. When the Spanish make their check, they will add 3 to their die roll. It means that they'll need to roll a 0, 1, or 2 in order to pass, their morale being 5. The roll of a 3 is modified to 6. They have failed their check. A fail marker is placed on the Toledo Regiment. It will not be able to engage in offensive fire or initiate melee combat this turn. In another example, we have this nice British unit, the 2nd of the 31st. It wishes to advance and attack the 3rd of the 16th Légère. It moves forward, and the French player can ask for a morale check. The French have a 3 skirmish factor, and the British have a 3 skirmish factor. Therefore, the die roll modifier is 0. The British player needs to roll a 7 or less to pass. The roll is a 5. The British player, at this point, has a number of options. The British player can stay where they're at and engage in fire combat later in their phase. They can mark their counter with the Fix Bayonet indicating that they'll be making an assault and a melee during the melee phase, or the British unit can continue to move as there's no zone of influence stopping units in this game. So the practical effect of having the skirmish values kind of built in intrinsically is that it does reduce the clutter on the board. There are fewer units out there, and yet this mechanism does take into account the sort of clouds of skirmishers that would be out in front of various légère units for the French, as well as the different British units, and particularly some of the ones that were rifle-armed that the British had as well. The mechanism itself is then going to benefit the units that would have historically had more or more effective skirmishers, and penalize the units that didn't have skirmishers as part of their national training, which is showing up a lot with the Spanish. So very interesting mechanism. I like the way it works. It definitely fits in with how the game overall comes together with the play and combat. A formation will begin moving on the fatigue track when any of its units fire, declare a charge, or make an assault, are assaulted, or are fired upon by enemy infantry. For example, Godinot's brigade engages in fire combat in the 8:30 turn. Their marker is then moved into the +1 section of the fatigue track. At the end of the turn, in the cleanup phase, the marker is advanced to the next level. This will happen each turn until the fatigue marker moves into the 10 box, at which case the morale for the unit is modified 2 for the worse on checks. Another option is that the French player pulls Godinot's brigade out of combat and places it in reserve. The marker no longer advances automatically each turn, and on a die roll may actually move down the fatigue track by 1, 2, or 3 spaces. So the fatigue rules are a good way of simulating the growing exhaustion of the troops as they're involved in combat over a period of hours. And then as a commander, as the gamer, you have to hold back some reserve, figure out a way to cycle maybe units out of combat to give them a chance to become refreshed. So it adds a different level of decision making for the players than you might necessarily have in a game where there's no fatigue and everyone's just out there blasting away at each other for endless hours. So very interesting concept, and one that it's taking me a little bit of time to kind of get used to, but I definitely appreciate the nuance that it's adding and sort of realism that it's adding to the game. Hey everybody, I hope that you enjoyed this little examination of the Fix Bayonet system, and if so, go ahead and hit the like button and make sure that you're subscribed if you haven't done so yet. Feel free to share this video out in the wider world, particularly with other wargamers who might be interested. If you're interested in checking out another Spanish battle that I had done some videos on, check out this one here on the Battle of Corunna that I done looking at the La Bataille version of it. If you have any other issues, comments, questions, go ahead, make comments below, and I will be happy to answer them for you. Until our next episode, be well.